Right. I was just about to say that. Great. Thank you. Okay. Perfect. So thank you so much, everyone. Wishing everyone a happy GAAD 2022 from DQ. My name is Abin Roy Chaudhary. I'm the Vice President for Business Development for DQ India. I have an overall experience of around 17 plus years working with various Fortune 500 companies and been part of a few funded startups, been a co-founder myself. So it's been a 3.5 years journey with DQ so far. I have been very enthusiastic about my association with DQ and have been an active digital accessibility promoter, from the time I've joined DQ. And I help organizations to start their digital accessibility journey with the help of DQ's products, services, and trainings. So that's a quick background. Aparna, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Abin. Rashika, we do have a request that came in for closed captioning. Can you take care of that? Rashika or Aish, please.
Sure, Aparna.
Thank you. Yes, hello, welcome, greetings of the day. I know we have presence globally, so I don't want to start with good afternoon, rather greetings of the day. I'm Aparna Pasi, and I'm the Director of Professional Services at DQ. Overall, I have 17 plus years of experience. Started my journey way back in 2008 with Nokia as an usability consultant, which in 2 months moved into being accessibility consultant. And then I worked along with Carnegie Mellon University, then Qatar Foundation, Wells Fargo, and with the DQ for the last 6 years. So all in all my career, I've been into accessibility and enabling applications to be usable by everyone. So that is basically what I do and what I enjoy doing. And welcome everyone. I really hope you will have an exciting and learning 3.5 hours of sessions with us. So let's get ahead with that, right? All right. So before we jump in and know more about it, right? Why should we even think about accessibility? So Abin, I have a very curious question for you.
Yeah.
So, in all of these years with the evolution of gadgets, iPhones, Androids, and all of this, right?
Yeah.
How do you see the evolution from your usage? Like, have you been using the devices in the same way you were using 5 or 10 years before, or have you evolved per se in using those devices?
Upon an interesting question, obviously last few years, if you say 5-10 years, kind of reminds me unconsciously now that I'm growing old. Okay.
Yeah.
But I think the way I have been using gadgets, I've been an iPhone user since very long time, like from the 4S days. And maybe, 10 years ago, I would love to read text on an iPhone with the smaller text size, right? And I would not enable the zoom on the phone when I was setting it up. But over the, I think, last couple of years, I've got now eyesight, right? I've got power. So I now prefer reading things with a little bit of zoom. If the text can be a little bold, I prefer to have a darker background of the iPhone. Versus, earlier I used to prefer a colored background, but that's again all keeping in mind, I think, just because things change as we age and how things look, and I think that's how the usage of gadget patterns have changed, and I definitely prefer larger text now.
Right.
I'm sure you have a similar experience as well. Like,
yes, absolutely. When you talk about age, that kind of, got me into a scenario of thought process where, I have the generations in my family now. I have my daughter who is 12 and my father-in-law who is 75. And, ironically, my daughter keeps teaching me how to use apps now, right? She's 12, but she teaches me. And I have a very hard time teaching my father-in-law or explaining my father-in-law how to book a cab. Isn't it very simple for all of us? Isn't it? You want to Uber or you want to Ola, you just pick up a application and start booking a cab. But trust me, Abin, for the last 2 years, I've been struggling to explain this to my father-in-law. And I failed so miserably that even though he lives in a different city, I book it for him even now. Like, he gives me a call, I book it, and then I share the number and everything else with him, which is really a lot more than him doing the booking himself, right? But
Right.
that again brings to me the difference in the ages and the cognition. I think when we were young, right, things were pretty easy for us to understand, to follow, to be with that in the flow. But as we grow old, that kind of becomes a challenge. And these settings that we are talking about, like, the color settings or the text zooming or making the font bold or changing the font size, all of these are coming from the accessibility settings that are enabled in the device, aren't they? So wouldn't it be safe for us to assume that accessibility is not just about people with disabilities, but it is about people who are aging, right? And I've recently read that our life expectancy is supposed to grow over 100 years, which means a lot of us may be actually living up to at least 90, 100. And that brings the context of why accessibility into a much bigger lens, because as we grow, we tend to get more difficulties, the physical difficulties with respect to vision, mobility, hearing, cognition. And ironically, all of these are going to fall under the accessibility realm, right? Would you agree with me on that, Abin?
Yeah, absolutely. I think accessibility has been very crucial, and I think it's for everyone.
So that kind of brings me to the definition that I keep telling everyone about accessibility, right? I do not talk about WCAG, I do not talk about assistive technologies, or I do not talk about people with disabilities. All I really want is when all people, everyone, right, regardless of their abilities, can get the same information and use the same functionality. When I say abilities, I may be having a low vision, I may be completely blind, I may be having an eye infection, which is like a very temporary disability, but that is also a disability. And I'm sure all of us might have experienced some form of disability in our time here, up till now, right? It could be ear infection, eye infection, sprain in your hand, or even a migraine headache. All of these kind of temporarily make us disabled to use the applications the way we usually use, right? So for me, accessibility is when anyone can use the application on any device, whether it is mobile, tablet, desktop, large screen, anything. That is really what accessibility is for me, because I don't refer to disabilities, I don't refer to any standards. My definition is as simple as it sounds.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
With that understanding, and since we kind of know that accessibility is important, not just from the law perspective or socially responsible perspective, but also from our user base, right? We are looking at reaching a large number of users, and we cannot afford to let go people with disabilities or aged population from that user base. Let's try to understand how we can sustain accessibility, right? And to do that, what we really did is we wanted to understand the sustainability, the two words, sustain plus ability. That's how we see sustainability. And trying to understand these two words in detail is going to help us set the momentum for the next few minutes, right? What we really mean by sustaining is ensuring that accessibility is a part of the process in your organization. And we will talk more about that in a couple of minutes. And when it comes to the word ability, what we're going to really talk about, or what we mean by it, is how do we implement these sustainable practices that we are talking in the point number one, right? What can you do to make those processes sustainable. So they become the abilities. And together, it's going to be sustainability. And that is what we will be, following, or we would be advising you to follow to make accessibility a sustainable practice in your organization, right? Abin, would you like to talk about the sustain part of the sustainability?
Oh yeah, that's I think that's one of my favorite topics, right? So how do you sustain it?
Go
And I
ahead.
think I've been getting a lot of questions around this, right? A lot of organizations that I talk to, they are always talking to me about, hey, how can we create a sustainable process, right? We feel accessibility is hard. We know there is a lot of rules that we need to comply to, things like that, but and we might not have that adequate understanding or knowledge to take things the way it should be. So ideally, in an ideal world, accessibility should start right at the beginning, right? Like we at DQ have been obviously always talking about a shift left model, right? Where we have been talking about that how you can start focusing on accessibility right from the design phase, right? And in order to go ahead and do that, your designers needs to be equipped with kind of accessibility knowledge. Um, your development team should have the knowledge, the right tools, while they're kind of focusing on building around accessibility, like whatever codes they're writing or whatever web page they're building or whatever mobile apps they're building up. All of that should be focused around accessibility as well. And then the testing practices should involve accessibility at every stage, including the CI stage, even during the release. And again, it's important that there is a knowledge, there is the tools, there is a thorough process behind it. And these three kind of comes under the inside development process, right? But then accessibility is also a journey, right? It's a journey which continues, because as your development continues, forever, your accessibility journey should also continue, right? And there are important things that we need to keep a check on in terms of outside development, where we should definitely be looking at a way to monitor stuff, right? Whether any releases that we're making, that is kind of whether we've taken care of accessibility there, or if we've already made a release, how can we kind of backtrack and see things are correct. So that kind of comes under the maintenance factor, right? So overall, I think if we go to the next slide, we've kind of outlined what are the kind of top 5 things that I think we need to focus on if we want to kind of create a sustainable process. And I think the primary thing to that is the trainings for every department, starting from design to development to testers, and even the most important factor is the leadership, who should be trained as well on accessibility and its benefits and its ROIs and its legal complications as well. Because I think the more empathy and the more approach we have at the top, it will obviously follow, right? So I think that is one of the very important aspects, that we train everyone, invest in their training to know about accessibility if you want to create a long-term sustainable process. The other thing is using the right tools for this every stage of development, and figuring out how I can do development or design or testing more proactively and more productively. That becomes very important. And both of these also adds to obviously your knowledge. And I think with the WCAG being robust and so wide, I think knowledge around that is very important if you want to continue this journey. And that can happen with your continuous engagement, learning in training, and also as you implement things on a day-to-day basis, you become better. And all these kind of leads to setting up a process where you kind of ensure that you set up process with engaging with experts in the industry or from your experts within your organization to ensure that the training, tools, knowledge, all of them are in place. And whenever an employee is coming into any of your development stream or designing stream or testing, they are trained on accessibility as a similar important curriculum, just like any other tools or any of them. And all of this kind of leads into commitment, and this commitment needs to come from the organization level, from the core leadership level, from the executive level. And I think that is where how we can create a sustainable process around accessibility. And I think with that, I somehow feel that in today's world, accessibility has never been more important than it is right now, where we are all working remotely. We've seen how things have changed and how accessibility can help if things are well taken care of. So that's my thought, Aparna. With that, over to you.
Thank you so much, Apin. Very rightly put on things. So, the way you've told about the process, or the steps that are taken into consideration while we are building something plays a crucial role, apart from the abilities that we will be discussing now, right? So having the knowledge, right, around, or the training around the accessibility becomes the very, very, very important aspect when you start the journey on embarking accessibility. Why are we doing it, right? Because I always tell this: if you understand why you're doing it and what you need to do, how you will figure it out, because we are all intelligent, we are all innovative people around here, right? But if you do not understand why you're doing and what you have to do to address accessibility, then how would never flow into your mind. So getting that knowledge is what the training is all about, right? It is not that you're going to be trained on and you take up the accessibility training and you will become experts in accessibility in 2 or 3 days. But it is the path that will be shown to you in the accessibility trainings, which you will have to take them forward. Right? You will not become experts, but you will definitely be empathized. You definitely would know what needs and what and how, why, and then how will flow in, as I said. So having these checklists, right? Let it be with respect to WCAG, let it be with respect to screen readers. All of these checklists will be really important for you when you're talking about your trainings and having the team enabled with respect to accessibility. And the next thing that we talk about is tools. Now, there are a lot of tools that are available for free, right? We can check the, their add-ons, their browser plugins, which are really present, that would enable you to check your code against accessibility issues. Let it be color contrast or unique IDs, duplicate attributes. These are pretty simple things to use. But among all of these free tools, Axe browser extension stands apart, because Axe Core, which we've crossed 1 billion downloads, is the base for all the Axe products. And that is what even is being used by, say, Microsoft and many other giants in their own accessibility applications as well. So having access to these kind of tools is really going to help you, because you're going to always get that low-hanging fruit easily, right? And from the volume wise, we can say automation or using the tools can help you enable 50% of the issues to be identified, or you can avoid the 50% of issues right when you're developing, which we will go through in the other session that we have scheduled for today on how we can do that. So having these kind of tools is very important, which would give you the problem, the source or the code for that problem, as well as a solution, right? If I just tell you that this is a problem, it's not going to be fixed. We should be able to tell you how to fix the problem as well. And that is what we give out as a part of our Axe browser extension and tools, which are free for you all to use and be enabled to make this accessibility a sustainable process in your organization. Now, when it comes to processes, right? I always emphasize on this, that please never take accessibility as a project, because a lot of times, I've been asked this question that, okay, we will start the accessibility now. Will we be done in 6 months? Will our applications be accessible in 6 months? Will you give me a clean VPAT and I can hold on to that VPAT forever? For anyone who is not aware, VPAT is voluntary product accessibility template, right? Then I would just ask them this question: are you going to stop your development in the 6 months? Because if that is the case, right, if you wouldn't touch the code, you're not going to update your code, you're not going to add any features to that code, then fine, your accessibility journey will end in 6 months, and the VPAT that you will get or you write will be holding truthful for the entire cycle. But then they say, no, we have a release in 2 months. We're going to change the code in 2 months. We're going to add new content. Then how should accessibility be done in 6 months? Because a lot of times when you're fixing accessibility, you're introducing new accessibility bugs. So it is a process, right? You will have to accept that first. It's not a project, it's a process. And you will have to have accessibility in every phase of your development. Let it be requirements, let it be design, let it be development, testing, and even in production and maintenance, you should be able to see that accessibility as an integral part of your processes, right? And to be able to do that, of course, executive buy-in is very essential, because if they do not buy in, then the whole process or the whole journey may be jeopardized. So that is going to be your leadership's responsibility and accountability to get bought into accessibility, and then enable you, starting with an audit, because that is what is going to give you the current state of your application. How many issues do I have in accessibility, or where do I stand in accessibility? And then once you have that audit in hand, get training, right? Train your team members, train yourselves to be able to understand those issues and see, okay, where do I have to fix this? Is this at a design level? Is this at the code level? Or do I have to completely, rethink about the concept? What do I have to do? And then once you have these two in hand, fall upon the tools. Use tools as much as you can to automate, to make this process simple, easy, so that you're able to understand what needs to be done. Initially, yes, it's going to be hard, but then once you make it a habit, you will not be moving the code to unit testing without checking for accessibility issues yourselves as a developer. You will not be passing colors when you're thinking of colors without testing for color contrast if you're a designer. Being a content creator, you would always think about the accessibility, what terms shouldn't I be using? I shouldn't be putting the directions in the instructions. I should have clear error messages. All of this will be part of your thought process once you are equipped with it. And when you are procuring something, right, when you're going to the other vendors and procuring, you would always ask about their accessibility standards for their products. Give me your VPAT. Tell me, when did you do your accessibility audit? How new is this VPAT, or when did you last update? All of these questions would come up in your mind when these processes are set correctly. Okay. Now, there will also be a situation where you may have to think, do I have to, this is a legacy code. Do I have to redesign things, or do I have to, kind of impact or remediate what I have? So it's always, if you're redesigning, if you're thinking about redesign, then it is always important that you start incorporating accessibility right at the design phase. Because when you have your applications, your wireframes, let it be low or high fidelity wireframes, accessible, your color contrasts are accessible, you know what is what at the design phase, you're then giving an accessible design to the developer. The handshake happens in an accessible way. The developer knows what needs to be done because the lead designer has given you all the required information. Now, with this information, the development team is going to incorporate accessibility right from the beginning. You will be using several tools that can help you identify issues right when you're building the code. And then, of course, when you move that to the testing, the testing team will have accessibility test cases, or the success criteria against which the accessibility testing is done is incorporated. And then the product that will be shippable will be a more accessible one. And this is going to be a continuous process as an agile methodology, right? So having all of these abilities within your team is going to what makes it sustainable. So if you see the accessibility trainings, accessibility audit tools will form the pyramid along with processes and knowledge. And these are what is going to really, this is a complete pyramid, which is going to help your organization to be more sustainable when you're talking or thinking about accessibility, right? And with that, I think I would really want to end the session and be open for question and answers if Abin doesn't have anything else to add for the topic.
No, I thank you so much, Aparna. I think that was an amazing perspective, and I think that summarizes really well about how we think that sustainability, which is sustain plus ability, can come in together and shape up any organizational structure where you want to implement accessibility all through the journey.
Yeah, accessibility is not one team's job or one person's job. It's something that is owned by all teams across the development, right? It is not one's responsibility, but it is everyone's responsibility. And if we can understand that, we are able to absorb that fact, then I think everything else will fall into line with respect to, embracing accessibility and making it part of a process.
True. Yep. Awesome. Great. I think we are now open for questions, and we'd love to address any questions you have. I think I had seen something in the chat. I think it was, there was a question which said, how is accessibility and sustainability, sustainable development goals, SDGs from United Nations are related?
You mean from the United Nations front? Okay. So that's an interesting question. But a lot of, if you see, the infrastructure wise or the goals that the UNDP kind of gives are a lot much around accessibility, like, your right to education, which is basically what we kind of refer to, like, even today, if you're talking about few countries, we have heavily, the vision impaired schools are heavily dependent on Braille. But the fact that we all are missing is that not everyone are born blind. And even if you're born blind, you don't learn Braille by default, right? There are much advanced technologies with respect to visual impairment. Like, why are we not thinking about empowering those students with iPads or with laptops so that they can have access to accessible PDFs, EPUBs, and can actually be independent, as in, like, the way we or the others are, or people with sight are. Similarly, housing. A lot of, mobility impairment people may not have access to a decent living because of the infrastructure problems. So these kind of things do definitely relate, but it is not like directly related. You will have to form the relation with respect to accessibility and other forms of the UNDP. Okay, I hope I answered the question. Do you have the next one? Okay, I see the other question. How accessibility is helpful to aged people. Okay, so in the beginning of the session, we have discussed, right, the kind of difficulties that people with disabilities have are categorized into vision, auditory, cognition, and mobility. Now, mobility doesn't just mean that you're an amputee without a hand or something. It could be tremors. Arthritis is something, a condition that many old age people have, where they're not able to bend their fingers, right? It's pretty painful. In those cases, they may not have the agility to use a mouse, so they tend to use a keyboard, which is an accessibility requirement, because we say all the applications should be accessible using keyboard. Your vision, it tends to deteriorate when you're aging, right? I do not have the vision when I was 30. I'm now 41, and my vision is definitely deteriorated. I need to use glasses. So that is again a piece of technology or lens that correct my vision to be able to see properly. So that is also what is it? It is an accessibility kind of thing. Similarly, cognition, the way we understand things may deteriorate. The hearing may deteriorate. So we tend to see, okay, do we have subtitles? Do we have captions? So all of these are going to be, not, if not all, some of them we will all face when we get aged. And that is how accessibility is related to old age people as well.
Right. Aparna, I think there was one more question which said, what are the tools available for accessibility check? And I think definitely, our free version of Axe tool, it can definitely do the job. Like you can do accessibility check there, and you can like just via automation using our Axe DevTools free version, you can cover up to 55% of accessibility issue coverage. There is more to it, obviously.
Yeah, go ahead, Abhi.
No, so I was just saying there is more to it. Like you can, I'm sure there are other various other accessibility tools as well.
Yes, absolutely. Apart from Axe, we have Wave, which is a WebAIM tool that is also completely, free, and people can use it. And we have a lot of color contrast analyzers, even browser-enabled, color contrast tools that we can use. So there are a lot of tools, but it's not, we cannot say one set of tools is going to be applicable to everyone, right? It is a tailor-made for your own use and for your own ease. So there are a lot of tools, but definitely the ones that we would suggest are the ones that you do not want to have false positives. You're more, you have all the required information to fix the issue. These are the certain things that you want to look when you're choosing the tools of your choice.
Right. And then I think there was one more question on the chat. I'm just trying to finish the chat first, then because and I think there was a question where it said, what are the key pillars of accessibility training, especially for designers and developers, from Animesh? Okay.
Key pillars is definitely understanding accessibility in itself, right? The people, the beginning thing is people. What kind of difficulties will people have when you're talking about accessibility? So understanding different disabilities, the extent of how it is going to impact them. And then once you have that empathy, understanding, see, WCAG is notoriously naughty. We understand it, but that is the reason why there are a lot of content available, which is going to make it easy for you to understand. But again, not all WCAG success criteria would be applicable for designers. So being able to segregate them, understand them, and then forming or having a checklist against which you would be able to test those checkpoints for your design or code is going to be essential. So I would say, empathy, and then having the correct tools and knowledge would be the pillars for your accessibility trainings.
Right. And I think there's one more question from Latoya, which says, what are the key, I would like to add that not all devices work well for the blind and visually impaired community. Apple devices seems to be the best. How do you how are you doing accessibility audit for multiple devices like mobile, iPad, and websites at the same time?
It's not going to be one effort. Definitely, we will have to use different devices, but to be able to cover a wide variety, we do, we do using different mobile devices and assistive technologies. So, for example, if you're doing web, NVDA, and Chrome, then we tend to suggest to use Safari and VoiceOver on a mobile device, and then probably Android, Chrome and TalkBack, so that you kind of get an understanding of how things are. But these days, the accessibility APIs and the browser APIs, they are pretty in line, in line with the way they're adapting and they're supporting. So there may be differences, but I wouldn't envision a lot of differences with respect to assistive technologies and browsers.
Cool. Okay. I think there was one more quickly where Vaibhav was saying, is really automation covering 60% accessibility? In my experience, manual testing in accessibility is the backbone because real world websites are mostly customized and a lot of understanding required for that. Please throw some light.
We never say 60% of WCAG success criteria, but 50% of the volume, right? Because a lot of issues come from the automation, and that is where we are saying that it is 50%, but not, and we are not saying that you can get away from only testing automation. You definitely need to do manual testing, as you rightly said. The content and the functionality definitely needs manual inspection. So it is a combination. But what we suggest is, using automation tools can definitely bring down the effort. That is all we say, but the manual effort is always going to be part of the assessment or accessibility testing. Without testing an application using an assistive technology, you may not be able to call it an accessibility testing tool. So I firmly believe as of now, unless the AI and ML really take over the world with fine issue identification, but as of now, it is definitely both together.
Yeah, and I think the manual testing will always hold its ground, and that's where, when I was talking about sustainability, I was emphasizing more about the training and the process and the knowledge, because that is key when you want to ensure that your manual testing bit is also not skipped. Like we might still do XYZ percentage of automation, but then it still is important that manual testing is still carried out. Right? I think the other question is, are you aware of any new legislation for global standards for digital accessibility?
I may need more details. Are we looking at any specific region, or globally are we looking at it, or is it the standards from WCAG? What exactly are we looking at? Because there are, for example, India has worked upon new standards for accessibility, which is based on WCAG 2.1 level AA. Along with language, customization or localization for our Indian languages, right? That's a new legislation that has come up. But if we know more about specific country or region, then we may be able to answer it in a better fashion. If it is WCAG, then yes, 2.2 is in working and may become a recommendation this year, but we are not yet sure on the timeline.
Cool.
So, Abin, we have Weber who's raised his hand. So, Weber, would you like to ask the question?
Yes, thank you for that. And thank you for such a good session, Aparna and Abin. So I have one question. As per my experience, last 10 years, I have seen that the client or the projects, as you rightly said in the beginning, that accessibility is not a project, it's a process. But most of the organizations, it's like they focus on accessibility when they have any project, like, okay, the client want accessibility, it's like retrofitting or might be from the scratching. So, and at that time, most of the clients just want to fulfill that compliances only. So my question is that how will you convince the people or the client or your higher management, like if I have to convince that it's not only about compliance, it's like beyond compliance, right? To make things accessible, might be if any page or any element is not violating anything, but it's not accessible. So that is something kind of a war kind of thing is there, because okay, you are completing or fulfilling or making your application compliant, but still accessibility is missing. That kind of
Absolutely, Vaibhav. Great question, because this is something that we struggle every day, right? When it comes to compliance, our clients usually see for minimal compliance. We don't want anything fancy, just give us the minimal compliance if it is meeting the WCAG minimally. And being honest to WCAG, that is actually what we look for as well, right? But if you if we go to the beginning of the session, and I've said commitment, right? That commitment comes in here, because without commitment from the organization or the leadership, what you're talking will not be enabled, right? It is a commitment towards accessibility, because meeting just accessibility standards may make them compliant, but they're not making them usable to everyone. It's not a great user experience to all the users, right? So that is where the emphasis needs to be there. And some of the clients listen, some of them who are in legal distress may not focus on what you're saying, because for them, the most important thing is to come out of that legal battle. It's a continuous journey or emphasis that you need to keep giving. It's not going to be solved overnight or in fortnight. It will take its own sweet time. But what you should be happy about is that you're preaching, you are doing the right thing, right? So telling them that yes, you are compliant from legal point of view, but think about the access, the user end as well. Because at the end, you want a great user experience for all your users and not just some users. If you can stress upon these and enable them with these facts, then I think at some point they will turn around. Because I've really seen traction in this field the last year or two. So that is definitely going to be there. It will definitely increase as well. So let's all work towards that.
okay, Pranav. Thank you.
Thank you, Vaibhav.
Great. Just a few, I think we are a little over time, but I have a few more questions. Let's quickly address that. I think one says, who will grow more in their career, working as an accessibility tester or an automation tester? Very interesting.
Well, Arvind, do you want to take it or do you want me to take it? I don't have a straight answer, because probably an automation accessibility tester.
Yeah, I think it's kind of, you cannot say which one is the best, right? Both are important at the end of the day, but
choose what excites you the most and then pick that. I think I'm sure you'll grow in that.
Yeah, and it doesn't harm that you take one of that as an excitement and then follow the other as an learning activity. That really doesn't matter, right? Yeah. And then I think Abhijit had a question which said, how do we look towards accessibility into metaverse? I don't have an answer for that right now, Abhijit, but I don't know if any of the panelists, do you have an answer for metaverse accessibility?
I think we need to have some experience of the metaverse before we talk about accessibility.
I think that's true. So, but Abhijit, we note your question, and I think we will definitely get back to you if we once we've done a bit of our research work. Thank you.
Then we have another request from Latoya. I have permitted him to talk, so
sure.
You, Latoya.
Thank you. I was actually just piggybacking on the last comment where we were discussing being vigilant and wanting to follow through on being accessible. Something I've actually done over the last year. I've actually submitted over 100 inputs or responses or feedback to different organizations about the inaccessibility of their government, organizational, or educational websites. I've only heard back from 2.
That's so commendable.
my question / comment is, what is happening now? I'm in the U.S. I'm a U.S.-based small business owner. My question is, are we aware, the panel at large, are you aware of any efforts that are helping to make these organizations more accountable to doing more than just the bare minimum of being compliant? It's the bare minimum aspect that's causing lots of issues. They do just enough to meet, like in the US, 508 compliance, but that still isn't fully accessible to their community at large. And I spend a lot of my time walking clients and team members through these sites because they're not accessible. Thank you.
A great observation, Latoya, because that is exactly what's happening. And unfortunately, the enforcement is only to the point where we are meeting the standards, right? It has to come from the commitment from the organizations to say, okay, we want to go beyond it. So there are different, thought processes around it, like the inclusive design aspect. A lot of work is being done around that. And there are a lot of institutes that are coming up with these courses. So probably including accessibility as one of the topics, while you're doing the master's or the bachelor's, even on the undergrad or postgraduate studies is important, because then a lot of engineers or a lot of technical graduates who would come out of these universities will have a good understanding of accessibility. What do we have to do, right? And they learn the coding right from the beginning with accessibility in mind. Same way for designers. So if we can think about those, I think your team itself is so inclined towards accessibility that whatever they design, whatever they are building is going to be accessible. But if you see as an organization, I want to do the minimum thing to meet the requirement. I don't want to go beyond it, because the realization has to sink in that there are equal number of aged and people with disabilities in this world, like any other folks around, right? So once that seeps in, that is absorbed, I think the realization would come. But again, not something that I'm envisioning that will happen in a year or two, or I don't know. If it happens, and it's great, but I'm not certain about that being part of it.
Right. Also, I think Nirupama mentioned a question point which says, once project comes to us, client is not more keen on accessibility. So we have to educate them, and then we have to implement minimal accessibility towards font color. That would be fine, right? So I think, Nirupama, a lot of this aligns to what Aparna just mentioned right now. It kind of depends on your client. Like why are they trying to do accessibility? Is it because they are definitely on that mission and they have that vision to make things accessible, or it is just that they want to comply to the law of the land and just get done with it? And even if they do want to just comply with the law only, then I think in that case also, just the font and color is not enough. They still need to look at many more aspects. And obviously, I think educating the client would make a lot of sense. And maybe, that education, if you can follow it up with some of the accessibility experts and say, hey, you should hear from the experts about what are the things that should be covered and why it should be covered. How does it impact, which is kind of critical, and which can be kind of addressed a bit later. Things like that should give more perspective to your client, what to do and how much to do. But then at the end of the day, it also makes sense that whether your clients wants to make it just accessible, or they want to make it accessible and usable, right? That's the most important aspect. And then I think the last question I have here is, it says, is A11Y testing and usability testing both are interlinked? Because usually, and I think it says, because usually I test web page by closing eyes. While doing so, feel something is not accessible and hard to use that particular website. I feel it's a bug. Do you want to take this question, Aparna? I think.
Oh, absolutely. It is very close to my heart.
Yeah.
So thank you, Abhishek, for the question. usability and accessibility, I wouldn't say they're interlinked. There are two different streams of the thought process, right? When you talk about usability, you're talking about users on a whole, all the users, right? Now that may include people with disabilities and may not. And since the usability studies really did not focus on that, the accessibility stream came up, which is actually focusing on people with disabilities, right? So whatever you're testing for is against the or for the people with disabilities. So when you're testing for accessibility, you're making sure that people with disabilities are able to use. Now, when you're testing for usability, they may be one part of it. They are not the core focus, right? Like when I talk about inclusive design, it's the same thing I say. Accessibility is one spike of the wheel, not the entire wheel. There are a lot of other things that you want to consider when you're talking about inclusivity. Similarly, usability, accessibility can be part of it, not the entire focus. So there are, ensure that you're testing for accessibility because you want people with disabilities to be included. And then you do a user testing, which includes people with disabilities as well as people without disabilities. Then you would identify the usability issues as well. Give them a heuristic walkthrough, let them go through that user testing and come up with your findings. But if you find a usability, when your question itself, you said, if I'm able to open my eyes, I'm able to see and do, which means from the usability perspective, probably there isn't an issue, but from an accessibility perspective, there is an issue. So ensuring that you are doing an accessibility testing will give you that compliance and that, reiteration that people with disabilities will be able to do or use the application. Doing a usability testing is going to ensure that all the users would have a good user experience. It's usable by everyone, right? So that would be my thought process on that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think it was a great session. Thank you everyone for making this interactive, making this filled up with question answers, and I really appreciate everyone's time. Our next event will start in, like it says 15 minutes, but typically in the next 3 minutes, because we are pretty much a little over time on Q&A. But once again, thank you so much everyone for joining this event, and you can always connect with me or Aparna on social media like Twitter or LinkedIn, and we are always available to answer any questions. So feel free to reach out to us and we'll be happy to connect and promote our mission of digital accessibility.